This is the primary cause of my prediction that Nvidia's stock will increase tenfold over the next 3 years. HBM in their design choices, these particular optical cables, and a host of other reasons. Since Nvidia has purchased them all, you will be in a very tough situation. You traveled abroad. Where have you been this week? I was in France, in Paris. Why did you go there? For around 45 minutes at the start of a significant AI conference, Jonathan Ross, the creator of Grok, and I engaged in a fireside talk to get everyone enthusiastic. Cool. Yes, that was quite fascinating. Does anything intriguing emerge from it? I believe Jonathan's soundbite was the one that really got to me. He did a great job, in my opinion, of outlining NVIDIA's strengths, which are in learning and inference, where the company is attempting to expand its business. However, I believe that was a clear explanation of the issue, which is that the features practically fight with one another between learning and inference. Second, he stated that by the end of the following year, he will have 50% of the available inference computed if he implements his roadmap. Whoa. Considering all of the requirements of OpenAI, Meta, and everyone else, which is, wait, a lower physical footprint. Is that correct? And that's only because they can perform all of the main models with higher tokens per second while using less power. Therefore, it would be significantly less expensive and require less electricity. That was a really great soundbite then. His reasoning was sound in its entirety. Thus, if you pay attention to these, yes, we did. It was good, but this was even better in my opinion. Since the discussion was recorded, I'm attempting to obtain a copy so that we can share it in some way. Anyone interested in learning more about NVIDIA should at least hear what he has to say since, in my opinion, the differences between us and them are rather significant, and the way he explained them was quite stark. It was cool then. To be honest, it was wonderful to be in Paris. How does NVIDIA react to this trend or the idea that there is a completely distinct chip category that is solely concerned with inference? Is there a different roadmap they need to start up right now? Or are they working on inference-focused chips? It's really difficult for them, I believe. It's a problem for structural innovators. What's the reason behind that? Due to the architectural choices they have made regarding things like high-bandwidth memory, HBM, or particular types of extremely high-throughput optical cables. These things are significant because they have essentially bear-hugged these markets as a structural component of their design and have gone on to acquire the global supply. Now, that's totally legal and makes sense. The problem is that if you architect around it and go through a totally orthogonal design process, you're not subject to any of those supply chain considerations. And I think he explained that really well. I didn't understand it in nearly as much detail as I did leaving, so I think that's an important takeaway. It's also really important for all the hundreds of chip startups and for these venture investors who are ripping money into these companies to know these differences, because if you are investing in a company that is subject to, HBM in their design decisions, or these specific optical cables, or a whole bunch of other things, you're going to be in a really difficult spot because NVIDIA's bought them all. So I thought that was really interesting. The other thing that NVIDIA does brilliantly is what Intel did in the 80s and 90s when they wanted to kind of choke the market for CPU competition, which is that they were able to define a metric that everybody started to pay attention to, which for them was clock speed. And if you remember, Intel would push Moore's law, and they would push transistor density and clock speed as the measurement of value. Now, for a lot of consumers, none of us knew any better, and so every time we saw a new chip, we would go through the Pentium upgrading cycle because we thought that's what we were supposed to do. It turns out that clock speed doesn't actually figure into speed the way that you think about it and experience it as an end user using software, and it's the same with AI. And so we talked about that as well. So it's an immensely important company. I believe NVIDIA is doing incredibly well. They are employing many of the same strategies as Intel in an attempt to establish complete dominance, but there are some crucial details regarding power, supply chain choices, and technological advancements that, to be honest, some people would consider unsustainable. The more I learn about them, the more I agree with that viewpoint, so I thought it was a very important conversation, and hopefully we can post it. That's a nice way to remember the NVIDIA investors who... The reason I'm smiling is because of what I'm coming up to here. Thinking about Elizabeth Warren, Nvidia made a suggestion during the most recent earnings call that if these expenses do increase, gross margins may be dropping to the mid-70s. The stock is down roughly 20% from its recent high, but it's still up more than 130% over the past year. As we follow these reports of the DOJ targeting the tech giant, we continue to watch Nvidia today, which is now in positive territory, nearly a full percent after that steep drop, that historic drop yesterday. Sema Modi has the most recent information on that. Hello, Sema. It was a historic drop, Carly. Nvidia fell as much as 9% yesterday due to broader growth issues and worries about a DOJ investigation. According to reports, antitrust authorities are investigating whether Nvidia is punishing customers who do not only use its AI hardware. That's according to Bloomberg, quoting sources familiar. The chipmaker responded, saying, quote, "Nvidia wins on merit, as reflected in our benchmark results and value to customers who can choose whatever solution is best for them." The question now that the market is trying to answer is whether this report, this subpoena, now turns into a formal complaint against the company. So here's what Wall Street is saying so far. Bernstein's Stacy Rasgon says it's too early to quantify the potential regulatory risk. That points to earlier cases in Intel and AMD, the FTC taking on Qualcomm, then Broadcom. He claims that while it all generated anxiety at the time, none of them had a significant long-term effect. Therefore, it is now being treated as a headline risk. Taking a step back and looking at how the upcoming election could impact tech and antitrust, Mac Delrahy, former antitrust chief, telling CNBC, quote, "The elections will likely not change the DOJ's continued focus on antitrust enforcement in tech, but likely will affect the process for merger reviews, allowing for what he says will be quicker resolutions where remedies are available." We are looking at Nvidia shares rallying today, guys. What is the worst-case scenario here? Is it a chip, a mini-chip, or fissure in the moat? The grand moat around Nvidia? Look, the moat is what Jensen and Nvidia have created, right? And that's not going to change, and I can almost take the other side, okay? This is being investigated by the DOJ. Let them investigate and provide an all clear so that there is no cause for concern. I mean, look what we've dealt with the likes of Apple, Google, Amazon, and some others for a number of years. But I don't think it changes that, and I think the reality is they are the only game in town, and nothing's changing that from an innovation perspective when you talk about $1 trillion of AI capex over the coming years, where Nvidia is going to get a significant piece of that. In just this political climate, though, Dan, where you have two candidates and their vice presidents who almost feel like it's a competition of who can have the most populist policies. And then you look at something like Google getting slapped for antitrust violations too. Is this a political climate that maybe needs to take a second look at some of these big tech names that we thought were safe from antitrust regulation and scrutiny? And maybe this time is different. Joining us right now with his outlook for the sector and Squawk Pick is Paul Meeks. He's Harvest Portfolio Management CIO. And Paul, how are you feeling about this in the aftermath? So what I think is going to happen is we'll have a repeat of what happened only a month ago. And so, if you take a look at the bellwether stock Nvidia, a month ago it did close at about 98 or 99, even got lower than that in early August in the intraday move. And so we'll see how it goes. I imagine that we'll retest, and if we successfully retest that, then I'd probably go in and become an aggressive buyer again. Since we received their quarterly earnings report and other data in the past month or so, the company is still growing at a very good rate, even though it will undoubtedly slow down a little. The outlook is very bright, and I think the only thing that's really new that changes the thesis, I don't really think it changes it at all, is the subpoena that they've received from the Department of Justice, which is typical in the technology sector when angry competitors start complaining to the government. So I actually think it's a pretty good buying opportunity after the smoke clears here, and I hope it's fairly soon. As of right now, the stocks